There was once a time when Confucius was at court and he heard that the stables had burnt down. So when he returned, his first question was not how the horses were, but rather, has anyone been hurt? Now this may seem rather speciesist on the part of the ancient sage to think that human lives are more important than horse lives, that our two-legged friends are more important than our four-legged friends. But you know for a fact that you are living in a dystopian hellhole if you live in a society that regards animals as more important than humans. Are you ready? Let's begin. So I'm going to show you a video in France about a homeless man who almost got his dog stolen by a bunch of animal rights activists. Yes, apparently some virtue signaling animal rights activists who saw the plight of the poor dog who was living with the homeless man decided to take it upon themselves to rescue this dog from the clutches of this evil homeless man who was imposing a very, very austere lifestyle on the dog. Yes, apparently it's a greater problem that a dog is with a homeless man than it is that there is a homeless man in the first place. Yeah, apparently it's a greater problem that a poor homeless man owns a pet than it is that there is a poor homeless man on the street in the first place. Do you see how fucked up this situation is? And do you see how fucked in the head you have to be to think that it's a greater problem that a homeless person owns a pet than if a homeless person exists in the first place? I'll show you the video. It's quite distressing, so you've been warned. So fortunately, this story has a somewhat happy ending. The homeless man did get his dog back as a result of the intervention of well-meaning citizens. But the fact remains that there are people in this world who quite literally care more about animals than they do about humans. They care more about animal welfare than they do about humanity. And when they see a homeless man with a dog, their first reaction is not, "Oh no, why does homelessness exist in my society?" When at the other end of the pole, there are people dining on champagne and caviar. Why are there people living in such dire straits? No, that's not what they think. Their immediate thought, these sick people have, is, "Oh no, the poor dog, is the poor dog going to be okay living with a homeless man?" But not a single thought is spared for the homeless man. You know that when your society has come to this stage and people care more about animals than they do about humans, this is a symptom of a failed society. But this utter callousness towards human welfare, regarding your fellow man as simply disposable, expendable, and exploitable, is simply a byproduct of capitalist society. Yes, capitalist society is to blame for this dehumanization of the human species in regarding human beings as only as valuable as the surplus value that they produce. I don't know if you guys remember the Oliver Anthony song, Rich Men North of Richmond, but this song basically highlighted the attitude that society in general has towards poor people, which is a very, very hostile attitude. The lyrics go something along the lines of, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. And You know, there are folks on the street with nothing to eat and the obese milking welfare. Now, these lyrics were hailed by many in the right wing as a cry of the downtrodden working class. And people from Ben Shapiro to other right-wingers, the right-wingers were hailing these songs as a cry of the oppressed working class people. You know, and it was precisely because this song blames exactly the kind of people that right-wingers would like the working class to blame, that reactionaries loved this song. Rather than blaming the capitalists who were exploiting the people, this song chose to punch down on poor people on welfare. Poor, overweight people on welfare, rather than the actual exploiters of society, the capitalist trash, who are stealing our surplus value as we speak. But no, this song was hardly what you would call a revolutionary song, simply because it targeted the wrong group of people. But I notice it's very, very popular for people in the middle class, not the ultra-rich of society, but the middle class of society, who really, really look at the poor with a virulent sense of disgust. And these people love to use the term merit in order to describe their ideal society. Now, I'm speaking from my own personal experience here, but coming from a middle-class Chinese Malaysian background, interacting with middle-class Chinese Malaysians, I can't speak for Malays or Indians, there is a very popular sentiment among the middle-class Chinese Malaysian English-speaking community that if we just replicated the Singapore model, all will be well. Because the Singapore model is a meritocratic model that rewards on the basis of performance and not on the basis of race. Now, first of all, I have to make it clear that I'm not in favor of any race, whether that be Malay, Chinese or Indian, receiving any special treatment. I'm a socialist and I believe in human rights for all, okay? But I think that people who peddle the word merit around usually come from middle class or upper middle class families, and these people are not only very, very elitist, but are also oblivious to their own class privileges if they use the word merit very liberally. What I mean by that is that the people who peddle the word merit are usually people that the world suits, or rather people who do not want to change the world because it suits them so well. In a sense that these are people with an inherent belief in the just world hypothesis. But fundamentally, people who like to peddle the word merit, even if they believe theoretically that people ought to be treated fairly, in theory, are people who see the world in terms of winners and losers, and that the people with money and the people who lead a civilized standard of living are simply people who deserve it. And people who are living in poverty, well, are simply people who deserve it as well. That's fundamentally the meritocrat's mentality. It is a very Lee Kuan Yew-ish sort of mentality, if you will. Now, I don't think that these people genuinely believe in merit, even if they say they do, because if they were to, for example, choose between hiring a transgender person or a cisgender person, all other factors being equal, you know they would choose the cisgendered person. If they had to choose between hiring a gender non-performative person and a gender performative person based on the Anglo-Saxon ideal of gender performative that fit the capitalist ideal, you know who they would choose. So fundamentally, when we say merit, when we talk about merit, who defines what merit is in the first place? when you talk about merit, it is a very arbitrary statement, because then again it is decided by a certain group of people in society. Who decides it? People with money, right? People with money get to decide what is meritorious and what is not meritorious. But fundamentally, it is not considered meritorious to be poor in a capitalistic society. But let's just say a pure meritocrat came around. And you know, this pure meritocrat hypothetically were to say, I don't care whether you identify as male, female, cisgendered, transgendered, whether you have long hair or short hair, what types of clothes you wear or how you present yourself. I only care if you can perform, right? Well, even that form of merit is still problematic. Do you know why? That form of merit is still predicated upon the assumption that everyone starts out on the same foot. But as you can see, there is no society in the modern world in which everybody starts the race on the same foot. Now, if you're from a poor family, for example, and the meritocrat says, okay, I am fair. When it comes to scholarship achievement, when it comes to achieving a scholarship, you know, you have a chance to excel. If you're an outstanding poor person, you can get a scholarship, right? And so that is supposed to be fair. And yet, a rich man's son or daughter does not even need to go to university, and they will be fine. A rich man's son or daughter does not need to even go to university, and yet, under your so-called meritocratic society, they will still be fine. So, while poor people have to be excellent in order to get human rights, in order to get human dignity and a human dignified standard of living, rich people only need to exist. Or I should say, children of rich people only need to exist in a so-called meritocratic society. So fundamentally, a so-called meritocratic society, even under the most objective of meritocratic standards, is still a society that is hostile to the poor, because the only way that you can somehow live a civilized standard of living is if you are outstanding and you can get a scholarship and go to university. Well, if you are born to a rich family, well, you have a civilized standard of living no matter what you do. Whether you go to university or not, whether you stay home playing video games all day or not, you have your life set for you. I don't think that's really a society that we want to strive for. I think we should be striving for a society without poverty in the first place, and without such a wide gap of poverty between the rich and the poor. Because children of rich people, and I'm not belittling them as human beings, but children of rich people live in a totally different world from children of poor people. Children of poor people basically live in a totally different world from children of rich people. So when you say that everyone has equal opportunity to succeed in a society that doesn't practice race-based politics, you are ignoring the fact that some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouth, while other people are born in the deep end of the pool. You see, so not everyone will receive the same opportunities to succeed, because under the current laissez-faire capitalist system that we live in, simply put, because people come from different socio-economic backgrounds, and under different socio-economic backgrounds, these things can predict where you will be in future. But one thing I find really perplexing is how people will get angry at poor people on welfare. They will call them moochers, they will call them lazy, they will call them all sorts of things. But here's the double standard that really perplexes me. Why is it that people in society get so angry at so-called welfare queens? who are leeching off the hard work of hard-working people. But at the same time, they will not get angry at the children of rich people who, in many cases, do not work or benefit from generational wealth. I'm not saying you should be angry at children of rich people who benefit from generational wealth. Generational wealth which was acquired through exploitation of the working class. But why are people angry at poor people on welfare who are struggling just to survive, but they're not angry at children of rich people, rich capitalists who benefit from ill-gotten generational wealth? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because society is fundamentally hostile to the poor. You notice how that Oliver Anthony fellow did not punch up at the capitalists. His reaction was to punch down on poor people, in the same way that those animal rights activists in France were basically more concerned about the homeless man's dog than they were about the homeless man himself. Because society, even in a so-called meritocratic society that doesn't involve race-based politics, is still hostile fundamentally to the poor. Yes, we live in a world that is fundamentally hostile towards poor people. Ask yourself why a jobless, homeless person is called a bum, yet a jobless bourgeois woman is called a tai tai, or the Chinese word for trophy wife. Ask yourself why a homeless person who does not work is called an able-bodied bum, but a capitalist who collects money is called a productive member of society, even though it is the workers that produce value. And the workers who are thrown out of a job, who end up becoming homeless to serve as the reserve army of labor. In fact, these homeless people are caused by the capitalists in the first place, because they need a reserve army of labor in order to replace the workers, should the workers ever go on strike or should the workers get too uppity. So you're basically blaming poor people for the conditions that have been imposed on them by capitalism rather than punching up at the capitalists. It's like blaming bully victims instead of blaming the bully himself, right? Well, I'm kind of sick of this mentality, to be frank. This sickening middle-class mentality that basically blames poor people for being poor and basically idolizes and glamorizes capitalist reactionaries. And I think that this is a mentality that needs to be eradicated in order for society to go forward towards the socialist stage. Because until we can stop blaming people who are less fortunate than we are and actually start pointing fingers at the actual cause of the problem, the capitalists, we're not going to get anywhere, okay? We're not going to get anywhere if we just blame the bully victims and demonize the bully victims rather than demonize the bully in the actual case, right? But I think that if we're going to move forward as a species that is presumably more enlightened than the animal species, we've got to stop demonizing poverty and treating poverty as a character flaw. Because until we can actually eradicate, or we can actually purge our species of this ugly trait of punching down on the underdogs of society, this savage trait of punching down on the bully victims of society, rather than punching up at the bullies of society, our species will not move forward. Society will not move forward. You'll never hear me using the word loser. Even against my worst enemies, I would rather call them a reactionary or a capitalist. Do you know why I never use the word loser, even against my worst enemies? Because fundamentally, that word treats poverty as if it were a character flaw. But I do not think that poverty is a character flaw. I think that greed is a character flaw. I think that the willingness to exploit another man and to be callous to the suffering of another human being is a character flaw. But I do not think that poverty is a character flaw. And fundamentally, if we're going to move forward as a species and really be worthy of being called an enlightened species, and if our society is really going to move forward, well, we've got to stop demonizing poverty and start demonizing the people who should be demonized in the first place, the people who cause this poverty. Thank you. Have a nice day.